In the beginning, we witness a youngster named Sia, who is tragically being sent to the hospital because his classmates have beaten him to the verge of death. The police are desperate to discover the perpetrators since they have never seen anything like this before. Furthermore, they are afraid because they fear that if the word gets out, they will be held accountable because they have not yet apprehended those guilty, and the only information they have is that there were 8 pupils, 6 of whom were male and 2 female. Later, when Seon opens his eyes in the hospital, he found his aunt in front of him. At first, he was confused about where he was, but suddenly he remembers his classmates who beats him. It makes his condition very bad, so the doctor comes running to give him sedatives. His aunt if he is okay or not. The doctor replies that he is gonna be okay. His condition is under control. Seon was in a coma for 9 months, he also added. His aunt tells him that she and his parents had done everything in the past, but the punishment they receive is not severe. They are just suspended from school for some time, because their parents are the one who control and manipulate the police, prosecutor, and government. She later added that his father and mother pour gasoline and burnt themselves so that this matter comes into the media. But still there is gone worthless. Seung becomes devastated upon listening to this. He just wants all of this to be a dream. He cries, "Why it has to be me? Why it has to be my parents? I was just sleeping." It has been 2 months since the funerals of his parents. His aunt then tells him that as the media covers the death of his parents, the student receives 2 years of juvenile school. His aunt keeps telling him that because the incident was captured on camera and put online, where it immediately went viral around the world, this was the only way that the country could learn about his case. Even the nation's president personally visited him in the hospital while he slept. 2 years passed, and we see a woman talking to a handsome man. In fact, she wants to rent an apartment. The woman also wants to meet the owner of the house, but the man tells her that the owner doesn't like to meet anyone. In addition, he also informs her that he lives on the rooftop, so it is prohibited for her to visit the rooftop of the house. Then we see our main character alone in the room. He is the one the other man is talking about. He is the owner of the house who doesn't like to meet people. After his disaster, he took refuge in his solitude here and has not gone outside since. Later, his nurse visits him to check on his medical progress. She also informs him that he must change his way of life or he would never get anywhere, yet the protagonist does. He remains mute and begins to pay her so she can go as soon as possible. After his nurse leaves, he begins to read the chat of the students who make his life disaster. He gets frustrated and lay on his bed. He realizes that the bastards got away with it because they were able to get around the laws by fleeing to the United States. And not only that, but they moved around as if nothing had occurred, enjoying life. All of this must be depressing for the lad, who has no choice but to lie down on his bed. Just then we see that something is falling from the sky. It landed on the top of his house that created a loud sound. Seung, who is terrified, feels it is a thief, but it also occurs to him that it is the abusers who are coming to attack him again. Nonetheless, he gathers his confidence and proceeds to open the door to investigate what is going on, only to discover that it is a flaming sword lodged in the middle of the roof. This situation definitely amazes him because it is not explained how the hell a sword got there in the first place. After analyzing it for several hours, he has no alternative except to ignore it and possibly wait for someone else to come and claim it later. He continues to engrain the sword and goes to sleep, but at the night he hears a drum sound which doesn't let him sleep. He soon starts seeing visions of a battlefield where he sees the owner of the sword, who was in command of a big army fighting monsters and giants. He wakes up and assumes it was all a dream until he hears a disturbance from outside, opens the door, and discovers that the sword is mysteriously on fire. He goes to the bathroom and collected a tub of water to put on the sword, But when he pours the water on the sword, it didn't work at all. He believes that the sword is demonic, so he runs from there. This repeated for several days, but now he gets used to it. He tries different methods to get rid of the sword, but none of them are effective. Later, the protagonist came into intimate touch with the sword for the first time. The protagonist had direct contact with the sword, which caused a tremendous reaction, creating a ball of fire that looked like the sun. Without giving the young man time to react, it hit him directly in the face and transferring the memories and experiences of another person to him. Seong, unable to move, and can only absorb this flash, which causing him tremendous suffering. After this hard process, the protagonist falls unconscious, with one of his hands holding the sword. He wakes up the next day, believing that everything that happened was not real. But when he sees the sword, he realizes that this is not the case. He tries to make some movements, but his thin body does not allow him to, and he falls seriously injured as a result. When his nurse comes to visit him, she is surprised by his different injuries, but the protagonist only tells her that it was due to him doing a lot of exercise. She does not believe him and tells him that it will take several weeks for him to fully heal. Despite all this, he tries to take up the sword again, but his injuries and pain prevent him. At this point, a strange voice in his head begins to speak to him, telling him the path to power. It's simple, just swing and run with the sword until exhaustion. That's all it takes. A few days go by and the nurse returns to see how he is and notices that his wounds have healed quickly. This surprises her, as she cannot explain how it happened, and she asks if he took any medicine. But he remains silent. She tells him to be more careful, as new injuries in the same area can be even more serious. However, the boy continues to hear the voice in his head urging him to train, which fills him with motivation. He stops, however, when he remembers that he has not gone down the stairs for 2 years, so he prefers to wait until nightfall. In this way, the moment arrives and he ties the sword to his body so he can run with it. He manages to do this with great difficulty, falling more than once. Despite this, he goes up and down the stairs over and over again until he is completely exhausted. When he can't take it anymore, the memory of the stalkers comes to him, motivating him to continue with his training. In this way, the days passes, and although he progresses greatly in his training, to the point of being able to carry the sword when at first he couldn't even lift it, the voice in his head asks him directly what the purpose behind everything he has done is. To this, the protagonist tearfully replies that it's all about revenge. A short time later, his nurse comes to visit him again because she has some news. She tells him that the doctor's report stated that Seong is now in perfect condition, and there is nothing preventing him from returning to school. This not only surprises Seong but also upsets him. He stands in front of her, clearly telling her that he doesn't plan on going back. The nurse is shocked and amazed by Seong's height because he has grown drastically since her last visit, and is now completely muscular. However, this situation takes a backseat as the protagonist is shown again taking up his training. And while doing so, memories come back to him belonging to the previous bearer of the sword. One of the memories tells him that the sword has 3 kinds of power. First, when he runs with the sword until exhaustion and past his body's limit, he obtains the first power called the Pledge of Indomobility. After the Pledge of Indomobility, if he can swing the sword 10,000 times without a pause in one day, he will be able to awaken something called the Blessing of the Sword. When the Pledge of Indomobility and the Blessing of the Sword become one, almost unlimited power, the essence of faith, is born. This motivates the protagonist even more, and he commits to not stopping his training until he can achieve it. At this moment, the story advances 1 year into the future, where we see the protagonist watching the news announcing the new president of the country. This may seem like a minor detail, but it is actually important because the new president is the father of one of the bullies who beat up the protagonist. The new leader immediately orders his daughter and the other abusers to return to the country. And as expected, this is carried out instantly. We see these people arriving at the airport. At first, we see only 6 of them walking home. As they walk, part of this group starts to plan how to take revenge on the protagonist. It is also revealed that the 2 missing from the group went to Japan to meet with the Yakuza to plan something against the protagonist. Meanwhile, the protagonist finds out about their arrival through a publication by these people, in which they mention that only 2 are missing to be reunited. The protagonist reacts by liking the post and thinking to himself that he hopes to see them reunited as well. Chang-soo and Young, not expecting this, and hired 2 killers to visit the protagonist. These killers arrive at his home and, seeing that it is just a boy, they think that only one of them will be enough to kill the boy. The chosen killer is very confident. He gets out of the car and goes to the roof. The killer enters the building, climbs the stairs, and reaches the protagonist's door, which opens by itself. Without hesitation, he enters to carry out his job. However, the other killer, seeing that his companion has taken too long, goes to see what is happening. He arrives at the door and, with a swipe, the protagonist drags him inside. All of this occurs at night. The next day, when Chang-soo and Young do not receive any news from the killers, they start to call very agitated, not knowing that on the other side they were literally beaten to a pulp. Chang-soo calls his uncle to complain about his killers. He says he has not heard any confirmation from the killers yet. When the uncle finds out, he tries to call the killers first. But when no one answers the call, he orders the leader of the gang to go to the protagonist's home and investigate. The leader and his men go to the house and find out that the killers have disappeared, so they think there is something wrong in this house. This leads the leader to call the rest of the gang to come and reinforce him. The gang enters the building and goes to the roof, with the leader staying behind and climbing the stairs slowly. However, he is met with one of his men being killed and Seung standing in front of him and punching the leader in the face. The neighbors, hearing the commotion, call the police. The police arrive and begin investigating, but they don't find anything suspicious until they reach the roof, where they are confronted by the protagonist and scared after seeing the dead bodies of the gang members, who were beaten by the protagonist. The police try to arrest Seung, but they realize it is Seung, and the police chief orders them to leave him alone. If they arrest him, it will attract the attention of journalists who will criticize the police for harassing the famous boy. 2 days later, Chang-soo meets with part of the group to plan something well organized, as the 2 missing members have just returned from Japan. These were the leader of the group of harassers and his daughter, the president's daughter. Once they are all gathered together, they ask the blonde man for the protagonist's location because they would also send a couple of goons, who, unlike the others, are professionals and belong to the Yakuza Mafia. The group of bullies immediately gives this information to the criminals, to which they respond that they should wait an hour because that would be enough time for them to finish off the protagonist. This surprises the harassers and also satisfies them, so they decide to wait calmly. This is how we see the Japanese men heading to the protagonist's home. They arrive at his door and upon seeing the blood stains, they begin to talk among themselves, mentioning that they should not take this lightly. The big guy tells the leader that what they have here is a wild beast. But the other guy decides to ignore these words and proceeds to prepare to enter. However, he doesn't even get to touch the handle when the protagonist takes him down from the other side. The other goon reacts immediately and sends his best right hook to the center of his face. However, this doesn't even manage to move the protagonist, who brutally sends a blow, stamping him on the ground. It is then that another member of the Japanese men who was with the harassers receives a call. It is none other than the protagonist who contacted him so that he could hear his desperate cry. In addition, he takes the opportunity to ask him where he is, but the guy with the cigar is so scared that he hangs up immediately. He sees that the bald man is still conscious and forces him to take him where the others are. Meanwhile, the other guy who is with the harassers anticipates all of this and tells the rest that the mission has just failed and they must leave immediately because if they stay, they run a serious risk. However, as soon as the bullies receive this information, they hear a cry from outside and it is indeed the protagonist who has just arrived at the building. As the protagonist enters the building, they start to panic and see that there are 3 stairs leading to the exit. They decide to split up, with the Japanese man and one other person going one way, and the rest going another way. The Japanese man thinks they should all go together, but his suggestion is ignored. Without wasting time, they all run away, hoping that one of them will run into the boy. As it turns out, this is exactly what happens, because it is the boy himself who ends up rescuing the prize while the others manage to reach the exit along with the police, who have already been alerted. Changsu has fainted, so when he wakes up, he notices that his legs and hands are tied. He quickly looks around, but he doesn't recognize anyone. The protagonist reminds him of what happened to Changsu's, which shocks him. He realizes that the scrawny boy has become a beast. Meanwhile, the news media has already arrived at the scene, calling the incident a kidnapping. The special police group is also asking the protagonist his name and why he is doing all of this. Our boy takes his time before slowly pulling out his sword and pointing it at the man while loudly recounting how 3 years ago, 2 people in flames sacrificed themselves seeking justice, and those people were none other than his own parents. Upon hearing this account of the tragedy, everyone present immediately recognizes it and fear begins to invade their positions, as it was very obvious what was to come. It is worth noting that up until this point, all the inhabitants of the country, even the parents of the harassers, were watching this live. The mediator of the police asked him desperately what his demand was, to which he coldly replied that there would be no negotiation. That all he had was a simple announcement. He said, "My parents paid with their lives in the fire to attract the attention of people for justice. But from today everyone who is responsible for this has to pay with their lives," and swore that he would kill them with his own hands, as well as their parents, brothers, and sisters. But his speech did not end there. He continued to say that no one would be able to stop his revenge and that if the police or the army tried to get in his way, he would have no problem finishing all of them off there without any hesitation. Changsu, full of tears, tried to convince him to let him go, but the protagonist just looked at him and made him stop. Saying the protagonist continued to conclude his speech, yelling at everyone to pay attention and raising his sword, declaring that this was his declaration of war. Then he quickly made a fierce movement and ended the blonde. Meanwhile, Changsu's father, who observed the whole situation, is left completely paralyzed. Similarly, the president starts to take measures by calling the police commissioner and explicitly ordering him to immediately execute the protagonist. This order is instantly received by the police, so the snipers are prepared to shoot, and they begin the attack by aiming at his head indiscriminately. However, he doesn't make it easy for them and bravely deflects the bullets with his sword. In response to this, the police force begins to open fire on Seyuang, but he quickly dodges the bullets and jumps from the building, using his sword to fall without a scratch. He then stands in front of the police cars and clearly screams that anyone who gets in his way will end up dead. In a brutal move, he throws his sword and starts destroying a couple of vehicles that are only in the way. He advances slowly through the gunfire, leaving the police to wonder if he is even human. Despite seeing what he is capable of, they continue to shoot at him, but they can't hit him at all. After seeing that nothing is working, the police desperately ask the sniper to shoot the protagonist, but at last he cut the sniper bullet into parts using his sword. Se-young realizes that the police won't stop, so he charges at them, crushing a couple and sweeping the rest to the ground. At this point, the journalists run away in terror, leaving behind even their own cameras, which manage to capture some of the disturbance caused by our young protagonist. All of this was observed on television by those who bullied the protagonist, and after seeing this, they were shivering from fear and didn't know what was coming next. Se-young manages to break through the police and forces one of them to tell him the exact location where the kids had escaped. The chief, upon learning of this, calls all units and informs them that the protagonist is headed towards the university hospital. But it seems it was too late, as we see the protagonist standing in front of the building, observing his prey. The pair of bullies receive support from the Secret Service, so they try to evacuate them to a safe place. However, they receive an alert that the protagonist is on his way. Without giving them time to react, he breaks a window and makes contact with them. From there, he emerges from the rubble and starts to advance, yelling at Soo-hyun, telling them why they are running now. Even in the face of their parents' power and influence, my parents stood firm for my sake and did not choose to run like you. The men in charge of protecting the bullies try to hold him back, but they are thrown out of the building. This short time is used by the bullies to try and escape at full speed in the elevator. The situation is that when the door was about to close, one of the men arrives and asks to be let in. We see that the door manages to close, but they start to descend instead of going up as they wanted. And all this is because the protagonist was standing on top of it, preparing to attack them. He begins randomly slashing with his sword without looking, trying to hit anyone who gets in his way. The elevator is forced to the first floor, and the doors open. Everyone tries to leave as quickly as possible. However, the guard who held Soo-young, one of the bully girl, is not able to run with such luck, as he receives a sword slash in the whole shoulder that destabilizes him. It is at that precise moment that Soo-jung regains consciousness, and upon seeing this scene, she throws herself out of his arms, managing to escape. The protagonist was not going to stop at anything, so he brutally crushes the guard in order to continue with his revenge. Here, an angry Se-young starts to come out from the smoke and tells them where they think they're going. The pair of bullies are completely cornered and without any escape route. They think that this is the end for them, when suddenly a vehicle arrives at full speed, impacting Se-young and sending him flying. It was a special bodyguard sent directly by Soo-jung's father. The bullies escape while the bodyguard stays to face the protagonist, and everything indicated that he could do something to stop the boy, but he ended up disappointing, as Se-young easily gets rid of him with just one punch to the face. In this way, the bullies and their men were able to escape at full speed to a safe place. Here, several reinforcements were added to ensure their escape would be successful. However, as expected, our protagonist appeared in the air, attacking the vehicles. He jumped from one car to another, reaching the car of his prey, and with a sword strike, sent the roof of the car flying. Soo-jung screamed for his life with tears, but this did not stop the protagonist, who, without losing time, proceeded to kill them. However, the driver managed to avoid this by braking abruptly, causing Se-young to be thrown out again. Here, the police force comes again to try to stop him. They use all possible weapons, but as expected, they don't even tickle the protagonist. He proceeds to rise towards some bridge poles, and from there he launches himself to finish off the obstacle and make his way towards his goal. Meanwhile, the pair of harassers are already mounted on a helicopter, ready to escape. Our protagonist becomes furious and prepares to launch his sword to prevent their escape. But right there, he stops and tells himself that this is not the way in which they should die. Instead, he will wait for them to be consumed by despair. On the other hand, we see government officials gathered to debating the ways to stop Seong. Strangely, the president is not in attendance at this important meeting because he is simultaneously attending another private meeting where the parents of the harassers are also discussing how to solve this problem. They come to the conclusion to send all of the arsenal of assassins. In this way, we return to our protagonist, who heads, without much haste, towards the cemetery of his parents. Here, upon entering, the doorman manages to identify him and immediately calls the police to come and arrest him. But Seong doesn't care. He heads to the tomb of his parents and begins to talk with them. He starts by asking for forgiveness for not visiting them as soon as he could step out of his house. There, the pain invades him and he starts to cry inconsolably, telling them how much he misses them. He says, "Mom and Dad, please don't worry. I fully understand what I am doing, so relax and watch me from there without worrying." He also promises them that he will not forgive a single one of them, and not one of them will live. Not even the country that turned its back on them when they only wanted justice. He says, "The pain I feel after losing you, their parents will get back as pain of losing their own children." Having said that, he proceeds to leave some of his belongings for them, expressing that it's all that is left of that son that they loved so much. Just then, the police arrive at the location and begin to ask him to surrender as he is completely surrounded. But at the same time, the military arrives without warning and starts bombing him with a tank. This, while it doesn't hit him directly, is enough to cause a tremendous explosion. When they believe they had gone too far, he comes out from the smoke, grabs his large sword and puts it between his teeth to take a fighting stance. We see that this position he takes is called the wolf form, where he charges at high speed and starts to shred anyone in his way. As expected, he finishes off the military without much trouble. After this massacre, Seon looks towards the horizon and remembers his parents when they were together with him. This saddens him for a moment, but at the same time, fills him with conviction to continue with his vengeance. He proceeds to leave the place and goes in search of his next victim. The government begins investigating Seyuong's background information, but they are unable to find anything relevant except that his only remaining close relative is an aunt. Contacting her will be difficult, as she has moved to the United States and formed a family there. However, this is not an obstacle as they contact the Korean embassy in the United States to visit the aunt's house and convince her to return, whether voluntarily or by force if necessary. In the scene, we see two agents arriving at the aunt's home and presenting themselves as part of the Korean embassy. However, the woman, seeing the violent way in which they presented themselves, refuses to let them in. But the agents tell her that it is about her nephew, Seyuong, and it is only then that the woman decides to open the door. It is here that she realizes that it was not just two agents, but a literal squad was ready and prepared to attack. This scene is left there as we see it again. Now let's move on to the protagonist's end. Apart from the group of harassers, this time it was who was with Suho. Here, they receive a call from Gi and another member of harassers' group who asks how they are. On this he gets angry at the call, telling him to worry only about himself and not to bother him anymore without any reason. And with a trembling voice, he insists on asking if they are in a safe and out of danger place, to which his friend tells him that yes, they are because his father sent him to a United States military base installed in Korea. He also adds that no one can enter there, so it is impossible for the Saiyan to find them. In this way, he hangs up the call with saying that he should stop worrying, since it is very obvious that the nervousness is consuming him. However, the reason he is so nervous or afraid is because next to him protagonist is standing, and after cutting the call, he starts to beg the protagonist to forgive him because he already did what he wanted, which was to call his friend and find the place where he was hiding. Here, in a more general way, we can appreciate how our protagonist ended all the security to find this bully. Desperately, the bully tries to convince the protagonist that all the harassment was on orders and that he was not to blame, that he was only following orders. Here, he kneels and full of tears starts to beg him to please forgive him, and adding that he was wrong and that now he is fully remorseful for everything he did. Our protagonist stops to look at him directly and asks him, "When we were begging for our life, what did you guys do?" And at this question, he stays paralyzed without words, to which our protagonist, shouting, asks him again, and with no answer, our protagonist raises his sword in front of his eyes and proceeds to let it fall, with a simple but effective goodbye. This is how the protagonist ends his second victim. Now, with the obtained information, he heads for the next one. Without any drama, he goes to the city center to take transportation that takes him to the military base where other bullies are hiding. Obviously, on the road, other people already recognize him, and as soon as they see him, they start running away quickly. At the bus stop, the protagonist raises his hand to be able to get on a bus, but the driver, upon seeing him, also manages to identify him. So he pretends not to see him and tries to pass him without stopping the bus. But the protagonist was not going to allow this and pulls the vehicle, forcing it to stop. On the other hand, we see the president having a private conversation with Soo-hyun's father, who tells him that he sent his son to the United States military base located in Korea, where security is guaranteed. So he encourages him to send his daughter there too. The president finds this a very good idea, so he immediately gives the order to take his daughter there. After this, we see Soo-jin with her personal agent arriving at the army base. As soon as they arrive, the alarm starts sounding, but people tell her not to worry, that everything is under control. However, nothing was fine because at that precise moment, our protagonist had just arrived and, using only his body, he knocked down the whole wall to be able to enter the base. There, he advances a few steps at a slow pace and stops to shout out Soo-hyun's name at the top of his voice. The American soldiers arrive at full speed, standing in his way, and ask him to drop his sword and raise his hands. On which, the protagonist replied, "There are people I seek hiding in this place." He knows that the troops will not stop without fighting, so he decides to throw his sword. But instead of using it as a form of surrender, he uses it to be ejected from the smoke and mount on it. This way, he splits an armored tank in two in a magnificent way. Thus, Sang begins a new massacre, destroying vehicles and shooting against soldiers, killing and destroying several of them. Sang takes the time to gain momentum and make a jump, reaching a great height, and then falling with everything on the last armored tank, where he pierces the driver with a tank. Sang, with this tremendous pose, leaves the surviving soldiers paralyzed. But just then the operational base of the CIA is shown, as they were observing everything through the squad's cameras. These people are surprised by the protagonist's potential and suggest that even the combat android they have in process does not even reach his heels, as well as all the projects they were secretly developing. One of the members of this group tells the others that he will leave in an hour to Korea, stating that the best thing is to stop attacking Seong, as a valuable being like this should not be damaged. This order immediately reaches the squad in Korea, and the military proceeds to ceasefire. The protagonist, who was devastating each one of them, surprisingly realizes that they stopped attacking, and even more surprisingly, they move aside, leaving him a clear path to continue advancing. The boy becomes suspicious, believing it to be a trap. But this doesn't matter to him, so he continues on his march. On the other hand, the newly elected president of Korea had just found out that the protagonist had managed to break into a military base. He calls the people in charge of his daughter, but during the call, the signal is lost, not only to her, but to the entire sector's security. This begins to worry her as she believes something is wrong, so she decides to take a few minutes to see how to proceed. Meanwhile, this is happening. The president's daughter, Soo-jung, is meeting with another bully, Soo-hyun, without knowing what is happening outside the building. She said she spoke with Yoojin on the phone before coming there, and Yoojin told her that she had a foolproof plan to stop the monster Seon. But she did not mention what it was. Suddenly, Soo-hyun asks his companion to bring water from the car, and the companion obliges and leaves. Soo-jung's personal agent takes advantage of this opportunity to approach the president's daughter and whisper to her that they sense something is wrong, so she also returns to the room, leaving Soo-hyun alone. In this way, they manage to move a few meters away from the room when they hear a loud scream. The security of Soo-hyun opens the door of the room and realizes that the protagonist has just arrived, but he is not alone. In one of his hands, he holds the completely destroyed body of his companion. The protagonist looks at Soo-hyun and drops the body of his companion in front of him, leaving him completely stunned. He desperately tries to escape while security tries to stop him with grenades, but as we know, this will not even tickle him. On the other hand, in a brief scene, we see the Soo-hyun father going at full speed to the military base because he lost contact with his son and someone mysteriously blocked the signal of the entire base, so he was unaware of the current situation at the military base. Having said that, we return to Soo-hyun. He barely manages to escape and goes looking for Soo-jung in her room, only to find that he has been abandoned. Right there in the hallway, the protagonist, thirsty for blood, arrives and corners him. He looks him in the face and asks, "Do you understand why I have to do all this, right?" In this way, by asking him this, a memory from 3 years ago is shown, where we observe the protagonist in school, where by chance he runs into Soo-hyun, the bully. He immediately apologizes, but the bully doesn't respond and looks at him with a look full of hatred. This insignificant reason was enough for the bully not to wait for the exit and to start beating him. He hits him repeatedly, causing our protagonist to start bleeding and telling him, "We barely started, man, so don't go passing out." Then, the bully grabs him by the hair and asks him, "Why did you have to get in my way and piss me off? Do you know who I am? How dare you block my way?" The protagonist cannot believe that for something as minor as a simple push is the cause of this beating. But the bully doesn't care, so he continues to hit him hard. However, a companion of the protagonist arrives and screams at the bully to stop. The scene ends there and we are shown the present where the protagonist is confronted by Soo-hyun. The bully starts to insult the protagonist by challenging him to kill him. But there is a reason for this sudden bravery. The bully has a card up his sleeve. He tells the protagonist that he can't kill him because if he does, the same thing will happen to his beloved aunt. Hearing this, the protagonist stops and looks at him without much to do. Then, the US Army contacts the protagonist to inform him that his aunt is indeed in a dangerous situation. This makes Soo-hyun even more brave and he starts to insult and provoke the protagonist by asking him to kill him if he doesn't care about his aunt. However, the military man hasn't finished talking, so he continues with his message, telling the protagonist that as his aunt is a citizen of the United States, the government has taken measures to safeguard her safety. Or rather, they managed to evacuate her in time and now she is in a safe place under protection. This news confuses the bully and his joy slowly turns into deep despair. After hearing this, there is nothing to stop the protagonist now and he starts his revenge and beats the bully hard. making him tremble with pain on the ground. But that's nothing compared to what's coming next. As the protagonist sees him writhing on the ground, he looks at one of his legs and in a bloody way, he cuts it off with the tip of his sword. Here, the bully starts to scream in pain while the protagonist starts to smile at him in a demonic way. Our protagonist tells that at first, his intention was to end it easily and quickly, but then he remembered that he is not the type of person capable of learning from his mistakes, and all that blackmailing with his aunt confirms it. Therefore, he took the trouble to prepare a special ending just for him. He starts to lift his sword and points it at his face, where we see that sword starts to be on fire, so he proceeds to light up his victim alive and look peacefully as Soo-hyun slowly consumes by flames while telling himself that maybe this way he can feel something of the agony that his parents suffered. This whole situation is left in suspense. On other side, we are shown the father of Soo-hyun, who just arrived at the military base. This man tries to enter the base at all costs, but the special forces do not allow him to. According to orders from his superiors, they cannot let anyone enter. So, the father of Soo-hyun calls the president directly, but the president decides not to answer because he had just received a call from the people in charge of his daughter informing him that she had managed to escape from the military base with the help of a helicopter. However, the other boys were not so lucky, and they used him as bait to escape. Having said that, we return to the leader of the Special Forces team, who is still guarding the place. One of his men arrives at full speed to inform him that they have found 2 officers beheaded, and according to witnesses, it is believed that the accused was none other than the protagonist himself. This confuses the leader, as they are supposed to be guarding the perimeter where the protagonist is, so it is impossible that he has left the base without being seen by anyone to commit this crime. In this way, they go to the office to investigate this situation. Then unexpectedly, a man arrives claiming he has information regarding the murder of those 2 officers last night. In this way, this confusing incident is left in suspense as we are shown the military base again, where the military squad was just entering the rooms where all the commotion took place. There they come face to face with a corridor full of dead bodies belonging to security. But despite this, it was nothing compared to what they would see as they continued to advance, because a few meters further on, they found the body of a completely burnt and black person. To top it off, one of the soldiers noticed that the bully was still alive. This soldier suggested to the other that they should call the doctor to try and help him. But the other replied that no one can help someone in that state, and the best thing to do is to leave him there until he dies. So they proceed to move forward to clean the sector and secure the area. Once this is done, they go to meet the protagonist, who was about to leave the place. Here, the soldiers start to surround him and kindly inform him that there is someone from the United States who wants to see him. But this is of no interest to him, although he leaves the sector with a tremendous jump. However, when he was already in the air, the soldier tells him that it is the person who prevented the kidnapping of his aunt, which stops the boy immediately, and he looks at him with anger. The troops invite him to spend the night at the base because the person who wants to meet him will arrive the next day. There they take advantage of giving him some food and new clothes so that he is completely comfortable. In this way, the next day the guy arrives directly from the CIA to meet the protagonist. He presents himself with the name of Paul, telling him that he is delighted to meet him, but protagonist interrupts him by telling him to go straight to the point. Paul tells him that it is very simple. The government of the United States needs his help in something and sees it as a return of favor for not intervening in his revenge, but on the contrary, because they helped him to carry it out. Additionally, he adds that together with the American government they were able to protect his aunt and now she is completely safe. The protagonist is looking at Paul with suspicion and tells him that he will only grant him one favor. Paul responds that this has to be negotiated and tries to blackmail him with the safety of his aunt. This angers the protagonist, who threatens him, saying that if anything were to happen to his aunt, not only will Paul be responsible, but the whole of the United States will have to pay the consequences. He then asks Paul to inscribe this on his heart. These words leave Paul completely intimidated, so he has no choice but to take the protagonist to the exit, where he guides him towards a tunnel where he can leave without anyone bothering him. But before he leaves, Paul mentions that he has valuable information that can be of great help. He mentions that of his 4 remaining objectives, the closest one to this position is Young, while Junhyuk and Yujin are still at their residence, and strangely they seem rather relaxed about the whole thing. He also takes the opportunity to ask if the protagonist knows a girl named Shion. Hearing this name, the protagonist is paralyzed and does not say a word, while Paul continues talking and mentioning that Junhyuk and Yujin always mention this girl while they talk on the phone. This information drastically changes the attitude of our boy, who turns around and looks at him with a terrifying look. In this way, the conversation ends abruptly as the protagonist leaves at full speed, leaving it clear that all this news about the girl named Shion affected him greatly. This is how we are shown the leader of the Special Forces who is interrogating a man who claims to have information about the murder of 2 officers the night before. The man begins to confess that 3 years ago, in the incident of school bullying that the protagonist was involved in, he was not the only victim, as a companion of his also suffered serious injuries. It is revealed that the identity of this girl is precisely Shion, and that unlike the protagonist, her case was kept completely secret until now. The man confesses that all the doctors and police officers who assisted this girl were paid to keep quiet, as well as the parents decided to accept the bribe from these powerful families. He adds that all the witnesses at the scene and everyone who witnessed Shion's state were compensated on the condition that they keep quiet. The interrogator asks him why he is telling him this now, and the man responds that he fears for his life, as he also accepted being bribed. The interrogator interrupts him and asks where Shion is now, to which the man responds that he doesn't know, but probably she is dead. The head of the Special Forces immediately orders one of his men to investigate where Shion is located. In minutes, the girl's report arrives indicating that she is still alive but is confined in a psychiatric hospital. There we begin to see the girl in her room drawing on the wall, and curiously, they depict the deaths of 2 policemen at her hands. The situation remains as we return to our protagonist heading towards his next victim. This time, he is heading to the sector where Junhyuk and Yujin live. Yujin is the first one to find out about it as she sees a live broadcast of him advancing towards their zone through social media. Immediately, she sends a message to her friend alerting him of everything that's happening. After hearing this, Junhyuk goes to his mother and informs her, as well as the police and military who are protecting him. Right then, they receive confirmation by radio that the protagonist has decided to advance first to Yujin's house, not this guy's. This is how Junhyuk finds out and quickly calls his friend to tell her, but on the other end of the call, he only hears a loud and ominous scream. The bully starts to feel extreme fear and tells them that they must leave immediately as he knows a way to stop the protagonist. Junhyuk's mom tries to stop him by saying that they even have military protection here, but Junhyuk replies that they can't stop Sang. If he gets there, they will all be dead. So, they leave before Sang reaches there. With that, we see Sang already inside Yujin's house, firmly grasping her neck and asking her where Shion is. She responds that she is at the psychiatric hospital and begs for forgiveness as she is telling the truth. Furious, he tells her that after waking up from a coma, he tried everything to contact Shihyun, but nobody knew of her because she was not registered in the news, social media, or even in school records. He even thought she never existed and began to doubt himself that she had ever existed. He continues by saying that the reason he is doing this is because of their attitude. They acted as if nothing had happened while his parents were dying in complete depths of despair, and that they had the pleasure of burying the existence of a normal and innocent girl without any remorse. He then furiously raises his fist and strikes her in the stomach, splitting her in two and damaging the wall. Lastly, he throws away the top half just to watch her last seconds of life. The story then immediately goes to the psychiatric hospital, where Junhyuk and his mother have arrived and start running in a hurry towards the second floor of the hospital. Upon seeing this, the doctor of the hospital tries to ask them who they are, but in response, Junhyuk throws him. After seeing this behavior, the doctor smiles in a demonic way, as if he knows something bad. Later, we see Shihan, the protagonist's companion, on a hospital bed. It was always the bully's plan to go after Shihan and use her to blackmail the protagonist. Junhyuk smiles upon finding her, but they are warned that the protagonist has also arrived. Seong quickly destroys the roof to reach her floor, where he is met by many soldiers, but the protagonist easily dispatches them. He goes to her door but becomes scared when he sees blood on the window, thinking he's too late. He opens the door and is surprised to see a happy and ecstatic Shihyun, who was covered in blood belonging to the bully. This is because she had taken care of getting rid of the bully herself. Furthermore, the bully's mother, upon seeing this, begins to berate him, telling him who he thinks he is and what right he has to decide if her son lives or dies. But at that moment, everything stops as Shihyun also finishes off the bully's mother. Lastly, she turns towards Seong, looks him in the face and proceeds to give him a cheerful smile. At this point, we begin to see how Shihyun met the protagonist, where she was transferred to Seong's school from another school. She was the first-ranked student there. She selflessly began to help Seong pick up trash, even though he had never spoken to her before. But when he did, he told her she shouldn't help him because if the others found out, they would start to harass her just like they did him. She replied that he shouldn't worry, that she would pretend to bully him so that no one notices that she is helping him. That's when they became friends. As in another memory, she tells him that today, someone confessed to her, and he responds that it shouldn't surprise him because she is intelligent, beautiful, and very popular. She tells him that she had to reject him because she found him strange and unpleasant, and asks him if he is not serious about who it was. Here, she tells him that it was Suho, and it was very funny that at the moment of the confession, he was accompanied by his entire group. Later on, we see them sitting outside the school talking. The protagonist asks if after class she will go somewhere, to which she sadly replies that yes, because someone from the bully group will do her the favor of introducing her to some new friends from another class. She confesses to him that she accepted this because, from the moment she rejected Suho, her friends gradually stopped talking to her. Upon hearing this, he tells her that she shouldn't go because it's a trap, that they will force her to do unpleasant things like stealing from someone or swallowing glue, all in the name of humiliating her. And he knows this very well because they did the same thing to him a while back. Additionally, he tells her that from the moment she rejected Suho and they saw her hanging out with him, she became a target for that group. Here, another memory begins to take shape. This time from the moment they were beating the protagonist because he warned Shihyun and asked him how he could steal their toy and interrupt their fun. It was at that moment that she arrived, screaming for them to stop. But unfortunately, she met the same fate, as the bullies beat both of them while mocking them, saying that they have heard that you have been spending a lot of time with Shihyun. Are you two dating or just playing house with each other? In addition, they said that they had planned to forcefully give his girlfriend a part-time kissing job and would also pay a good amount of money for it. But he kept running their plans each time. Our boy cried out for them to stop hurting Shihyun and said he would do anything they asked. However, one of the bullies disagreed and ordered the others to strip his clothes and underwear too. But then they noticed that Shihyun had stood up. And in the face of this humiliating scene, Shihyun decided to jump off the building with tears. All these memories come to both of their heads at this point, so we return to the present, where Seong is reunited with Shihyun. In an emotional scene, the protagonist can't hold back his tears and stands up to touch her face. She returns the gesture, telling him that he's changed a lot and that she has many things to tell him. However, this emotional scene can't last long because they have to leave immediately. They leave the room, but are stopped by new reinforcements that have just arrived. But surprisingly, these are taken down by the same doctors and nurses from the hospital. These people are somehow interested in Shehan, so they protect her and guide her to escape safely. So, in an armored vehicle, they leave without raising any suspicion. There, more calmly, they start talking, and he tells her that he thought she was dead. She breaks down in tears, telling him that she's sorry for not telling him and making things harder for him. At this, our boy also breaks down and embraces her, saying thank you for being alive. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more great content. Thanks for watching.